Here we go on the final of the four theories that you need to know from the introduction chapter. This is the rational paradigm, which includes a number of different theories, rational choice theory, the social exchange theory, and the rational bureaucratic perspective. This theory or these theories, even though they're combined, you will definitely see them discussed in the various readings as they are all very pertinent in the understanding of organizations in terms of decision making. Um, and we also see this theory, particularly the social exchange theory, applied to relationships. This theory is actually a economic theory, and it's really grounded in this notion that people make rational decisions. That when we are tasked to making a decision, that we weigh um, the pros and the cons of the situation, and that ultimately what people are doing is they are making decisions that are going to be in their best interest, that where they're most likely to receive the most positive outcome with the least amount of cost. So, um, again, very, very accounting, very economic in its outlook in many ways. Um, so this theory, especially when you start looking at the rational choice theory, is going to be focused on the idea that people are very motivated by their wants or their goals, and that they're going to act within our decisions are in specific given constraints. We only have so much information to work with, but with that information, with the environment that you're in, people are going to make decisions where they're going to anticipate, they're going to think about what are the best outcomes for themselves. They're going to consider and calculate what's most likely to help them, not hinder them. So, for example, when making a decision about whether or not to move for a different job, you're going to, a person would weigh all their possible opportunities. They may also weigh um, what the cost of the move may be to them in terms of relationships, in terms of housing, in terms of other potential moves they can make. And this theory is very focused on thinking through all of the choices, given again information that you know, and the specifics of your situation, but that people will, according to this theory, they're always going to make what is the most rational choice. They're going to decide what is going to help them the most, what's going to give them the best outcome, and then, with the least amount of cost, without the least amount of pain um, potentially concurred or incurred, I guess, not concurred, incurred. Um, so this theory really does think about it in terms of, pluses and minuses. A lot of times when I'm teaching in class, when I teach this theory, I will draw like an accounting column, and especially when I'm talking about relationships, it's very easy to see this in terms of do you get into a new relationship? What's the positives about that person, and what's the negatives? What kind of punishments might we incur? We may be very attracted to a person, however, we may know that they may cause a lot of drama and that can cause us some strife, and so that would be a negative. Or that they have a lot of other people attracted to them, and so therefore we may have to deal with issues of jealousy. again, for marriage and family, this is a great theory to just to decide, whether to be in a relationship or whether to get out of a relationship. In terms of just our personal lives, though, especially when you think about it, this is very applicable to work lives. We can think about um, the decisions that we make and how we decide in terms of, is there going to be a lot of rewards? Are we going to gain something from the situation? And at what expenses? Now, rewards, a lot of times we think of this as monetary, but when you start thinking about social relationships, you can see that it can extend to a lot of different ways. In workplaces, it can be things like social recognition or advancement. Um, but it can be also more intrinsic, personal growth, whether or not um, you just feel comfortable with that person. So it can be emotional also. The third theory that's discussed under this large umbrella of rationalization or the idea of rationalization theories is that the rational bureaucratic perspective. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to be so focused on bureaucracy this semester and what Max Weber has to say about bureaucracies. But this does fall under this whole rational paradigm. And Max Weber, when he discussed bureaucracy, he was really talking about the way that organizations work in a way that's really driven to meet goals and always focused on how to do that in the most efficient means possible. And bureaucracies are driven to do that. They're designed to be rational and well thought out in that respect. Um, so we're going to be talking about different aspects of that. One of the big keys to this theory, though, is that power is really limited to positions, to an office within an organization, and that's what legitimizes, what makes that authority seen to be legitimate. Um, along with so along with the idea that a hierarchy is very good for an organization. Again, we'll be talking and delving into this more as we dig into the reading of the material. This theory is very focused on being non-emotional, being calculating, and impersonal in our interactions, all of which may lead to some of the downsides because quite often we don't tend to be that. But your reading points out to some major issues with this theory. So three of the ones that I just pulled out really quickly was that it tends to separate us into different spheres, which I may have been more true in the past, but I think especially under today's environment with the coronavirus, we see that we're not in very separate spheres, that our household personal sphere is not necessarily just limited to one space where our personal and impersonal, our business and impersonal is in a totally different sphere, but rather we see them as intertwined, which causes some problems. Especially in a world where we are all constantly talking about work-life balances, and it's because they do all get mixed in. But the other big issue is that it tends to focus on positives of rational organizations, and there is definitely a lot of irrational behaviors that happen within larger bureaucracies. Largely because a lot of times we're following rules that those organizations set up that don't necessarily make sense, or we can talk about the red tape of a bureaucracy where people become very frustrated because they are being treated impersonally and often being shifted around from department to department, where nobody quite knows how to handle the problem. So we see that there are a lot of problems that are built into bureaucracies, that they're not necessarily always the most efficient means to the end. Um, the other thing that Max Weber, and we're going to be talking about this in the readings, is this notion of an iron cage that being rational, making these decisions. We're not always very good at that, and it may be that we're not meant to work like machines, right? Because bureaucracies kind of creates a machine of people, and that is problematic for the human condition in the sense that uh, we need to be able to um, have decisions and that deal with our emotions, that deal with us being humans. Whereas an iron cage, if you can picture an iron cage like it's like a bird being caught in a cage, that we often may sense that. And so we're going to delve into that more in the future weeks. I don't want to keep you any longer than that, other than I hope you can see that this theory really is about making choices that are in our best interest, using it kind of like a accounting, so, kind of like an accounting, um, where you have, one column with the good stuff and another column with all the bads, whether we're talking about debits and credits in terms of accounting, or benefits and cost, being another apt terminology you could use in this case. Um, uh, do the last assignment. There's a final assessment that you'll want to complete. And if you have any questions, we can definitely dig in deeper if we need to at the beginning of our class in week 2 on Monday. Thank you.